Hello you, and welcome to the last daily rundown of the week with me, Dan Morfitt. Thank you for watching Channel 7. This is the show where we look at all the big news stories of the day. Tonight we'll be discussing high heels at work, naughty rap stars, and Trumpety Trump. It's the story that just keeps on giving. And later on we'll be talking to Suzanne Guest as well from Head Injury UK about Brain Injury Awareness Week. But first, let's welcome tonight's guest, who will supply the daily rundown with insight and attitude. She forgot she was on the telly today, and if anybody has a spare diary, she would really appreciate it. Polymath Supreme, she does absolutely everything. It's the great Ashliegh Talbot.
Hello. You didn't mention that. Never mind.
Thursday. We expected you here.
It's all right.
And welcome back to actress, writer and barrister Ayesa Toure. Thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's very hot in here tonight.
It's very, very warm.
You look glowing, girl. Right, and don't forget you can get involved with the show too. We're as interactive as you like. Join in the conversation on Twitter @The Daily Rundown, or at the very least, give us a follow. We want followers. We might even follow you back. Right, so let's look at our first story now. Culture Secretary John Whittingdale has said that the BBC must put distinctive content at its heart. His comments came as he announced a major overhaul of how the BBC is going to be run. The licence fee will continue for at least 11 years and will be linked with inflation. And for the first time, viewers will need to pay it to use BBC iPlayer. Also, the public will find out which employees earn more than £450,000. It's also been proposed that the BBC Trust should be abolished and make Ofcom the corporation's regulator, just like all the other TV channels and radio stations. And it'll also be replaced by a BBC board. Currently, the BBC and the Culture Secretary are at odds about the government being able to appoint members to that BBC board. So, is this a good move to see a better BBC, Ashliegh?
We shall see, perhaps. I mean, it's very difficult to tell on the basis of, like, the day before the white paper is going to be fully released, which is tomorrow, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so we still don't really have all of the details. Now, we'll see, essentially, because this ostensibly sounds good, and when I've been sort of thinking about it, it's like, you kind of think the BBC has to make that move into the on-demand television a la Netflix and you know, a la even YouTube, really, just that instantly accessible online content. And so I've kind of been thinking that, well, the BBC kind of needs to start charging and start incorporating the license fee, or incorporating the iPlayer into what the license fee pays for, or it's not going to survive, really. And so, I mean, I'm interested to see what happens. I mean, I like the BBC, I'm sure. We're a bit worried about the potential political placements on this BBC board that the government can appoint people to. But then again, that's going to depend on the government of the day, and in 11 years' time, who's going to be in the Houses of Parliament, and what's the digital media landscape going to be like?
Heck, we could be in a nuclear wasteland in 11 years' time.
Right, so, you know, maybe that's too far ahead to be planning.
Talking about
Since the war is going to be inevitable, apparently.
Talking about nuclear wastelands, Ayesa, everybody said that this white paper was going to be an Armageddon for the BBC. They thought the government were going to be able to tell them when to put on Strictly, they were going to be able to have to reveal everybody's salary, it was going to be reduced down to bare bones, there were going to be less radio stations, they were going to be told to come offline. It's not that bad, is it?
Well, I mean, as you said, time will tell. What I found most interesting about the idea of an overhaul is one of the things that they were talking about, as you said, was distinct content and also more diversity. You always hear this word diversity, and then you think, well, what does it actually mean?
They won Britain's Got Talent 5 years ago.
Yeah, possibly, or did
Maybe
it mean?
6.
Oh, right, no, I see what you... Yeah, okay. Sorry.
So what I want to know is, I would like to see that diversity reflected in content. For years and years and years, I remember when I first went to university, I was interested in working for the BBC, and I remember people saying, oh no, you've not hope in hell, you really need to go to Oxbridge. If you didn't go to Oxbridge, you know, you wouldn't get in. Most of the producers and executives, high executives, were all kind of Oxbridge educated. Most of the actual content in terms of the programming, the stories that they made, have made in the past have been quite often of a similar ilk. You know, we know the BBC does like costume drama well, you know, period drama, etc. But do they do? I mean, now we've got things like Dr. Foster, etc. But I mean, I always remember things like GBH on Channel 4.
You were in GBH.
Oh yeah, so I was. Yeah.
You can't bring up an example of something you were in.
Yeah, no, well, yes I can. Why not? No, why not? But at the same time, something like that would never have been commissioned by the BBC. Things like Queer as Folk would never have been commissioned by the BBC. Would never have been, you know, they have a certain style, a certain content, and we know, okay, we've got the fee payer, you know, the licence fee payers paying, and they want to have a particular standard. But there are so many things that, so many other kind of brilliant types of drama, things like Breaking Bad in America on HBO would not have been commissioned by the BBC, I don't think.
But
I'm going to see things like
that example's been brought up by John Whittingdale and other culture ministers and other people in the government. Breaking Bad was on AMC.
Or was it AMC? I thought it was
AMC,
HBO.
and that's a subscription service. HBO, they're saying, why can't the BBC make great shows like HBO? It's a subscription service. People pay extra. Like in the UK, we pay extra if we want Sky.
Ultimately, you have like commissioning editors, commissioning executives. What I'm talking about is the type of diversity in terms of content, story, ideas.
How is Breaking Bad diverse?
So it's hugely diverse. It's hugely diverse in terms of the idea, in terms of the storyline, in terms of the type of actors you've got. That is not something that the BBC would have ever commissioned.
Line of Duty, The Night Manager.
Line of Duty. I haven't watched that one.
So that's the thing. If you haven't watched it,
no,
you can't,
I'm talking about I'm talking about a style over time. A style over time.
Ashliegh, these arguments are always going to happen because they're subjective, aren't they? We like what we view. If we like EastEnders, some people would poo-poo it. Some people might poo-poo Question Time, but really love Pointless.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe. Perhaps. I mean, yes, it is subjective, but I mean, to say that the BBC wouldn't have made something like Breaking Bad, I mean, they wouldn't have needed to for a start because, you know, we've got the NHS. So no one needs to turn to drugs to fund their
Yeah, he would have got cancer and had chemo.
Theoretically. Although, again, time will tell on that score as well, I feel. But to say that, you know, that wouldn't have happened over here, that, as John Whittingdale is, that's a bit kind of dictating, yeah, well, this is my view of the world, you know, and I don't think that Breaking Bad would have been made in Britain. Well, I mean, yes, probably not, but you are right about it being a subscription service that's paid for that. The same goes for Game of Thrones, obviously, which is big and lavish and everybody loves it, but it's still the most pirated show in television history. So you have to kind of keep up with the way the world's going. Now, in terms of diversity in content, though, I see what you're saying about, because there's a BBC aesthetic, isn't there? And it's when something's had all of its rough edges sanded away,
exactly.
You know, and when something's not quite edgy enough to sort of make people go, oh, but it's certainly edgy enough to make people go, oh yes, no, I've read about that.
Yes, exactly,
you know, it's
exactly.
Got a kind of, it's not. But at the same time, John Whittingdale saying
I think
it needs
that's
to
what
be
I mean
more
about the style. That's what I'm talking about in terms of that style. That, you know, like you said, it's all when the BBC does it, always does it seem quite after it's been tested by everybody else.
Yeah, everyone
and
else
then it's always, like you say, sanitized, and you know, it's always a sort of what I imagine the kind of you know, the Richmond version would be. Do you know what I mean? I think that's what I'm getting at.
As the host here, I have to sit on the fence, but I seem as if I have to put a shield up at the moment. One of the shows that keeps getting talked about by Whittingdale et al. Is Strictly Come Dancing. How dare you have such a popular show? It was originally a ballroom dancing show from Blackpool a few years ago with Terry Wogan and Angela Rippon and not many celebrities. They made it into a celebrity show. It's become a mainstay of Saturday night. It gets ratings like you wouldn't believe. And on top of that, it's sold across the world. And the money that the BBC gets in from selling this format to America, to Canada, to South America, to Africa, to Australia, brings in a lot of money. And no other... the
I don't have
ITV
a-
would not have done Strictly Come
Yeah, no,
Dancing.
but
In
I
fact,
don't
they
have
did Dancing on Ice.
I don't have a problem with popular entertainment. Everybody needs popular entertainment. You know, there's family entertainment, etc. When I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about, like, you know, the people who come together to create stories, to create ideas, to create shows, you know, have been for a long time in the BBC the same types of people. And they have often, you know, said, oh, well, we need new talent, but they would always go to the same kind of pool of talent. Now, you aren't going to get, you know, really different points of view, really different ideas if you always go to the same brain, basically, is what I'm saying.
Less Ricky Gervais, then.
You know, you need...
Well, fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah. It's a good thing as well, surely, that the BBC is also coming under the control of Ofcom as a regulator, because for so many years...
You're just jealous because we're under Ofcom, that's what it is.
No, but everybody's under Ofcom, and
Yeah,
the BBC's already always been slightly separate. And let us not forget, you know, this white paper will come out tomorrow, but under previous governments, under previous political parties, the governors of the BBC, which were white middle-class grandees, were taken out, and a BBC Trust was brought in because the government got into an almighty spats with BBC Radio over a story about sexing war up, and the BBC were proved right. It's not just this government, it's governments.
Yes.
No,
they don't like the
absolutely.
BBC's free arm.
Yeah.
You know, because lots of other countries, you know, okay, so obviously the extreme examples are places like North Korea and Russia, where state-controlled media is just total, whereas the BBC has very much got a free hand and they can say what they like. Sometimes a journalist chooses to say what might be the party line and they get blasted by the population for it, and sometimes a journalist chooses to go the other path and take what is not what the government says, and they're lauded by the government, lauded by the public, but blasted by the government for it. So that seems to me that the BBC is doing its job right, in that it's not, you know, a propaganda piece, or it's not supposed to be, although it depends what you read on a number of websites, I suppose.
It depends on how the wind is blowing on any day.
Exactly, the situation.
We will see this BBC white paper come out tomorrow. It's not the Armageddon that people are expecting. I'm still quite shocked that people were allowed to use iPlayer without a TV licence. That was quite a hit. But we'll find out more tomorrow as it's finally published. Time for a quick break now, but the three of us will be back in just a couple of minutes to discuss more of the news on the Daily Rundown, including the search for a missing child and Star Trump 2. The Wrath of Khan. Right, get a brew on or start the weekend early, you know what I mean, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes.